Fantastic person with me today, all the way from Portugal. I make that point because I was trying to find out where she was. She was in South Africa. Then she's gone to Portugal. I don't know where she's going next. Kirsten Clacey, how are you?
Hi, Tony. Thank you. I am very good. Very good. How about you?
Oh, brilliant! It's so good to have you on out talking remote today. And we've got a great topic, I think. But before we go there, um, I know you well, and a number of people know you well. But I think just in the spirit of it, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, my name is Kirsten. I'm currently working at a company called Automatic as the head of facilitation. Um, Automatic is most commonly known for like their brands WordPress.com or WooCommerce or Tumblr. They house lots of interesting web brands, and yeah, they're also known for their distributed working, and that's partially why I joined because they've got such a fascinating like way of working. They're one of the leaders in that space. And prior to this, I've been doing facilitation and very passionate about distributed working.
Yes,
So
and
yeah.
I think you were. There's a certain little text that you wrote.
Yes, I also the work over the years did lead me to write a book called the Remote Facilitators Pocket Guide. And that was, yeah, an exploration of how we can come together online in effective ways.
Yeah. So if you get a chance to read that book, it's brilliant. And that's pretty much how we all sort of found each other, suppose is the word, through the guide
The
and
interwebs.
mutual friends. So we've had that opportunity. Now, the reason I got you on today was you had a really great experience. And you've been working for Automatic, but you also had this experience where you've just created this company-wide connection event, and it's with a lot of distribution, a lot of remote. Um, so I really want to talk about that. But before we go there, I do want to talk a little bit about Automatic and how Automatic structured and how your distribution and working in remote works, because I think that's fascinating for everybody to understand. It puts a bit of premise around the scale of what you're about to do as well.
Yeah, so I could talk about automatic for days, so you can just reel me back if it's needed. Um, but automatic has got such a like beautiful culture. It's one of the things that drew me to the organization. So it's an open source company, um, and it's kind of not just a way of working; it's also like a way of being. So everything internally is open source as well, meaning that everything's transparent. We're asynchronous, meaning that most things are written down. We do meet online occasionally, but we say that synchronous time is sacred. So if you're gonna bring people together, especially because we're distributed, like you and I were just saying, getting people online when you're in different parts of the world means often that someone's going to be sacrificing their dinner or their breakfast or much worse. So if we are going to gather, yep, you, I'm guessing it's both. Um, so if we are going to gather, it has to be excellent. We have to gather in excellent ways. Otherwise, we just are asynchronous. And there's a very sophisticated network internally. We use a tool called P2, and it's basically all written communication. And that means that it is all completely transparent. So everyone can see what's happening within the organization, contribute to anything. So it's open source outside and open source inside. And I love it. It's the most distributed model I've seen.
And as you can see, Andrew's really excited by that. So, uh,
Yeah,
synchronous time is sacred. I love that. Yeah, I think
it
so too.
is.
Uh,
It really is.
for those who are listening, don't hesitate to fire off questions, fire off quotes, whatever you like. We're really happy to have those as well. I know that Kirsten's very good at answering them, so let me talk a little bit more about Automatic and that whole remote facilitation and remote. When you talk about that, talk to me about where everybody is. I think that's
Mm,
the interesting thing because, like I said, you're in Portugal, but
yeah.
where are the rest of the world?
The rest of the world is the world. Literally everyone is everywhere. So it's always changing how many countries we're in, but there's a map you can look at on the website, and there are people everywhere, right from the furthest east to the furthest west place. And you can also live anywhere working for the company, right? So if you move like I did from South Africa to Portugal, you can move anywhere and you can still work for Automatic. I think that's one of the powerful things is it's designed to kind of support people's lifestyles, like acknowledging that you're not just this employee that comes to work, you're a human with this complex world, and automatic kind of enhances that or works with you in that way.
So I'm taking there's no edict to go back to the office then.
No, I do keep an eye though on those surveys that go out sometimes just to see what's happening in the world, and I find it interesting, and I'm always grateful to be somewhere where it's just the norm. I mean, Automatic was remote since they started, which was around 2005. So remote is not new for them, or distributed is not new for them.
Yeah, I think I was talking to John Burke on all the remote things. I think we were talking about that before, and his quote was, we were doing remote before it was cool.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It was just a case of like, well, the people who started the company want to live where they live and they don't live in the same city. So let's make it work. And out of that evolved a very nuanced way of working online as well, I think. Because a lot of people also ask me, well, how could we maybe replicate that asynchronous way of working or different pieces? And I think you have to understand that it evolved out of its context and that influenced everything that then came, like the hiring practices, who we hired was making this possible, the tools we set up with, So it's very difficult to come in to another company and say, well, you should do these things because they've been hiring differently. They have different tools. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's going to be for the context of your organizational construct, right? Well, it's
exactly.
just like agile, right? So you
Yeah.
see the pervasion of, let's use this particular agile thing that was created for a music streaming service, perhaps, and we can use that
What
in
could that be?
the banking system, or we can use that in another, and because it doesn't work as great.
Exactly.
Sure, it's
Exactly.
exactly the same thing. So,
Yeah.
having said all of that kind of stuff, I was really excited when I saw you posting about this creating a company-wide connection event. So let's talk about that event first. What was the event, and what did you think when you started to think about that and go, okay, I've got to create this for everybody who's all over the world and all over the place?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe to speak about kind of where it came from as well. So, because we're an open source company, anyone can suggest anything, right? And whether it's taken up, it's the same as open source, whether it was a good idea or it made sense. So we were in a town hall, which is our like one of the few occasions that most of the company gathers. And Matt Mullenweg, our CEO, had just come back from one of the big meetups. And so Automatic does have these meetups where we meet around the world. And he was just reflecting on how amazing it is when you bump into someone you've never met at the coffee queue, and you discover this shared interest in, I don't know, music or being a radio presenter, um, or all these little random, he called them collisions, like these little collisions that allow you to connect to someone. And obviously as a facilitator, that immediately got me thinking like, yeah, that's so powerful. And in a distributed space, it is more difficult because we don't randomly collide at coffee stations or over playstations and stuff. So I kind of reached out and I was like, would you be interested in experimenting with how we could create like a random collision space online? And I mean, he's awesome. So he was like, yeah, go for it, see what you can do. And that was the only mandate. It was kind of like self-initiated, and then I started bringing some people together. But that's the context. Um, and then what was the other question?
Yeah, so before we go there, somebody's just picked me up and there's a question, and I think I'll ask that now before we go into the next
Yeah.
issue. That open source.
Yes.
What do you mean by open source internally?
Uh-huh. So if we think about open source, right, the premise is that anyone can contribute to the betterment of this thing, right? And if it's a good enough contribution, it'll get accepted and make the collective better. So everyone's responsible for making the collective better. And so that operates at so many levels at Automatic, right? So we can all contribute to other projects across the organization because it's transparent and documented. So I can see what every team at Automatic is doing. And if I have an idea, I can offer it, or I can draw connections between what two teams are doing. And so it happens at a project level, but it also happens at like ownership for the whole company level, meaning that if there's something happening that feels like there's greater potential or it could be better, then it's on all of us to make it better. And because it's a very open communication landscape, we then talk about it in the open and have these conversations. And if that gathers enough momentum, it also then changes the culture. Does that kind of answer it?
Well, I hope it does. It wasn't my question, so hopefully, if and you're happy with that, let me know. But it does for me. We'd spoken about it off air as well, and it was in my list of questions to ask anyway. So it just happened to be
Yeah.
where
I could also offer one very practical example. So I'm in the learning team, right? So I'm a facilitator and coach, and one of our mandates is to create ways for like automaticians to learn and get better at their jobs. But because it's open source, nothing is mandatory. So what we do is we create these options and we create different things and we try things, but whether people use them or not is entirely up to the collective. And so it's quite possible that we could offer things, and maybe people have seen traditional L&D divisions offer things, no one takes them, and then makes them mandatory, and now everyone has to take this feedback training or this whatever training, right? But we don't make things mandatory, so the work has to speak for itself, or else it doesn't get adopted.
That's brilliant. I like that in the auspices of the open source thought. So that's really interesting. All right, so let's get back towards the company event. You've got the opportunity to do this. So then you moved into bringing some people together. Let's talk about how that went. What were your next steps, and how you actually went to build it? I think that's what people really want to hear.
Yeah. So we have like an events team, so I asked if there was a volunteer from that wanted to be involved, and I tried to assemble like a relatively cross-functional group that could lightly own the structure. And then I was really thinking about like, well, how do we create this kind of connection online? And to be honest, if I think of most like online connection events that I've been to or things, they're pretty cringe. They're pretty like it feels sometimes like we're trying to connect for the sake of it. And I was like, well, I really don't want that, but I also don't know what sparks connection necessarily. I mean, I know what it does for me, and I know what I enjoy, but I don't know what that will be for other people. And then leaning back into open source, which is kind of whatever I do when I'm not sure how to make a decision, I was like, well, I don't have to know, actually. And it's probably better that I don't presume to know. Maybe we should rather, just like everything, distribute the creation of this to everyone. And that means that it'll be whatever it needs to be. People can then add things that are connective to them. And if it's not, that's okay, because that's also what the collective created. So it'll become whatever we need it to be. So then we started shifting towards it's also like an open space model. And we changed it from also collisions to connections, even though collisions was the original word. It didn't have a great association. So we called it intentional random connections. Intentional because we were going to set aside like a 24-hour time slot for it, because being online, you have to be a little bit more intentional. Like things don't just happen by accident. But random meaning that anything was welcome, like push the limits, like add anything to the agenda for the purpose of connection.
All right, so talk to me a little bit about what the actual things were in that agenda in that event, because you've piqued my interest. I get the idea, but I want to know what actually
they were.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, it was so fun. I was amazed, right? Like you kind of leave that space knowing that things will come through, but still when they come through, you're like, whoa, people are so cool. So there was like an async virtual rave. So someone they just made a spreadsheet, and then you could sign up for an hour slot. And some people actually recorded themselves DJing at their homes. Some people played playlists. Some communities co-created playlists of their country. So like I was part of that in South Africa. We were like, let's represent South Africa. And we made like a South African playlist that occupied an hour. So there was a virtual rave. I have the whole list, which I can share as well, but there was like dog parties and cat parties. There was art classes. Some people actually taught people how to paint. There was numerous language lessons that happened. There was parenting classes. There was a children's book reading. People brought their children and someone read a book that they had written. There was Lego building, lots of Dungeons and Dragons, lots of games, typing competitions, like all sorts.
That's really interesting. So then the question that comes up for me, I love the rave party, by the way. Not so much Dungeons and Dragons. I don't want to offend rave people. It's just not my bag. But you have all these different events, and you've got them over this period of time. Now, does that mean that there's time afforded? So, did Automatic say, "Well, you've got time to go to these," or was there an expectation it was out of hours, out of their working hours, or how did that work?
Mm.
Or
Mm.
when you've got spare time, because I can see people sort of thinking about it, they go, well, that gets out of control, then I lose productivity, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah. So that was part of the preparation work, was like sensing when would be an appropriate time to do it based on like company pressure and then different division pressure. And part of it was also checking with leadership if they were comfortable, if people took some time out, because I don't think it should be above after hours, right? So the main thing there was announcing it well enough in advance that people could prepare and allocate time in their teams. And then our main premise is just make sure you've had conversations so that you're able to participate. Conversations with your team, conversations with your lead. We can't create one blanket statement or blanket rule like this is going to take 24 hours for everyone. This is going to, because it'll be different for everyone. Some people wanted to participate in one thing, some wanted to participate in seven. So rather than creating a rule, we just encourage people to have appropriate conversations and take responsibility for their time while acknowledging that this thing was given approval at a very senior level. So you've got the backing of the people at the top.
That's good. So we've got one there from John out in YouTube land. I can tell you that's not our John either. So did anyone come up with problematic ideas, and if yes, how'd you navigate them? How did you do that? Or did you have problematic ideas?
Well, yeah, we didn't have any, and I'm really grateful for that. It's not really in our culture, so it's not in our culture. And maybe there were, not to say that this couldn't happen in other companies, but maybe there were a few things that helped avoid that. So the agenda was created in the open. So everyone could see it leading up to the event. People were adding things, and you had to take responsibility for whatever you added to the agenda. So you had to be there to host it. You couldn't put something on and step away from it. So like there was that personal responsibility built into it. And because I'm a facilitator, I was also trying to think about the frame that I was creating the whole time. So we did a lot of work leading up to it around like weaving the frame, the language. What is the space we're creating? What is it that we're inviting you into? Why is it important? And because you're distributed, you have to do that over and over, acknowledging that some people will miss this channel and miss this channel. So we did it over and over. And so there was a very, very clear frame and high personal responsibility that I think maybe mitigated some of that.
Well, that's really good. So let me talk about technology, because obviously that plays a part in this. And you talked about P2 before. But what kind of tech were you using to create these spaces? And obviously there were virtual applications like Restream or whatever it be that we're in now that allow you to communicate. I'm interested to hear what you were using as tools.
Yeah. This is one of the interesting learnings for me, and I was learning real time with Automatic because I'm a facilitator. I know there's lots of pretty tools out there. There's like pretty whiteboard tools. There's pretty virtual tools like Wheelo, and I was like, oh, we can use all the tools. But like coming back to that principle of like a tool should be fit for purpose, right? It doesn't need to be the shiniest tool. It needs to be the most appropriate tool. And so in this context, you've got 2,000 people, and at Automatic, anyone can use any video conferencing tool, right? Again, nothing's mandated, so you can use the tools that work for you and change them if they're not. So that means it's unlikely there's much shared fluency on a variety of different tools. Zoom is generally used across a couple. So whilst I wanted to use pretty tools, I was like, there's going to be this fluency that could be a barrier for some people. So I thought I was starting with the simplest tools, and I suggested we used FigJam, which is a whiteboarding tool, which is used. So FigJam to build the agenda, and then Zoom, just have tons and tons of Zoom rooms on the day that would be open. But initially the feedback was gentle, and I was listening to it, and I was like, okay, but we need a whiteboard. And then the feedback was coming through more and more like it's difficult to use, or specifically the time zone thing's tricky, right? Because it's like, okay, cool, it's 2 a.m. UTC. Now I'm constantly having to convert back into my time zone. Like it's frustrating. So then basically again, open source. Someone submitted an idea that gained lots of traction and we pivoted towards it. And it was to just move to Google Calendar. So we made a temporary Google Calendar that anyone could subscribe to. And people just posted events directly there. And if you were subscribed to it, then you could actually see them in your diary. It wasn't a pretty whiteboard. I had made it all pretty. I was like, okay, we're tracking this. We're going to Google Calendar. And it was as simple as Google Calendar, and they could use Zoom links that we had set up or any tool. And that was it.
Wow, that's a journey. So, because there are so many tools that you could use out there.
Yeah.
Butter and etc. that have all the fantastic stuff, but it's very interesting. It came back to the simplicity of those particular.
Yeah. And there's like Wheelo and stuff, those virtual spaces where you can walk around and find people, but then people again have to learn them. And if you're preparing for it asynchronously, you don't have the opportunity to get everyone online and help them get through that barrier. You have to do something that people can kind of onboard to themselves.
So let me ask you now you've done this once, and the intent would be, I assume it's been successful, you probably do it again. But I also understand, I remember talking to John, and I think that you also tend to have recharge events where you get together, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, those are our meetups, right? So you kind of commit when you join Automatic to meeting your team at least once a year somewhere in the world, and then probably your division as well. And those are super powerful because there is just something so rich about being together in person, like sharing a meal, sharing a drink, like just communing, right? So we do have those. And it's also possible sometimes that people can't make those because of visa issues or last minute problems. So this is kind of not our primary mechanism of connecting. Our primary mechanism of connecting is together in person, but this is now like a backup mechanism that we have available when we need it.
Okay. So what was the response? So that's the next question. Is so did they like it? Was it well, because you can do these things and then nobody, like you said, you can't lead the horse to water, right? What was the response from the organization?
I was so surprised because obviously I've been a part of other events like this before, or like trying to create connection, and I've joined them, and most time people are a bit like, yeah, it was okay, like it's that thing we had to do for our company, like it's one of those. But we did a survey and we were gathering feedback, and I can also share some of it. But in the survey, and this was what blew my mind, 100% of people said they would join again if we did another one.
Wow.
So that to me kind of speaks for itself. Like 100% of people who came would come again, and 100% of people would refer it to other automaticians. Everyone who hosted a session except for one person said they would host again, because we were also curious, like how difficult was it to host? And the person who didn't said it was a maybe. So that was really positive. And everyone said that it had the vitality of a meetup. It had the like authenticity of what it feels like when we gather together in person. So that was important to me, is that it had that like real authentic, not over-engineered feeling. It just felt like it was people coming together. So the response was very positive.
Okay. So we've heard all the good things. Now I need to ask the hard question, right? Obviously, there were things that didn't work or didn't work on the day, or there are things that you learned from that you wouldn't do again. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I've done lots of these things, myself, like the events, and you've been part of them, and there's always something behind the scenes that's going
people running around trying to make stuff. Well, it's interesting because we were co-creating with people for a month. It meant that there were like lots of small iterations happening all the time, rather than us building up to some big thing that we would then have to stress about and could go either way. So in that sense, I think because there were small iterations happening all the time, it's probably going to sound false to say this, but there weren't any like big things that happened that were scary, which is, I agree, abnormal for a big event, right? But I think it's because the whole company had been like micro adapting together as we built this, and people really were adapting it. So the calendar pivot was a big thing, actually, because we were getting little bits of feedback and people were having conversations like FigJam's difficult, da 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 da. And then I was like, well, now we've got everyone there. To redirect a 2,000 person company to a different tool is very difficult. And how do we do that? But it kind of happened organically, where the momentum moved us there. And that for me was my biggest learning, because I was like, I failed as a facilitator. My primary thing is to bring the space for people to gather, and I brought an incorrect space. And what I learned is like, there's no right or wrong space. Like, rather we have to like cultivate that way of moving with people and be comfortable with, like, you bring something and then you move with what comes up. So truthfully, that was the one pivot. And the only other area I think that we learned would need some enhancements next time is our one division is more structured than any of the others, because it's our customer support division. So we call it happiness. And their time is naturally scheduled because we have to have 24-hour coverage of customers.
Yeah.
So by nature of their work, they're not. And we had done lots of work before, like working with the division lead to make sure it was okay to use time, etc. But I think our comms could have been better because some of those people didn't get to participate as much. So we got buy-in from a few of them for the next round, if we do one, to just join us in the planning. But yeah, maybe it sounds artificial to say there were no big breaks, but really it was just small breaks that everyone managed together.
Oh, it's a really valuable learning for anyone that's doing this, and I guess we talk about those small iterative chunks, but you can apply it to this as well. So
Yeah.
very important. There was something you and I talking about off air, and it was about trying to organise people in different countries and different spaces and different places, and people always talk about that the golden time or the golden moment where everybody can, and it just doesn't exist, I don't think. And your thoughts on that, because you've just done this thing.
No, it doesn't. We're never going to find the hour that works for everyone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, what I liked about this event, it was a case of like, either you can join at a wonky time because something cool's happening, or if you don't, then with that like open source philosophy, then it's on you to make something at your time, right? No one else is responsible for that. If you spot a gap at a time, then pitch a session. And if you don't have your own topic, then borrow the one that you would have gone to that you can't. So I agree. There's definitely, it's unlikely we'll be able to meet always. And that's also why I think asynchronous working has to become a reality if organizations are going to invest in being distributed. We have to just get better at it. And that's a long journey, I think.
Yeah, we see that. So async is the, I think that is the most poignant change in moment, and I think normal working that we know as we do now will be, it'll be a thing of the past. It'll be a relic, and the async will be the way that people work in the future. And they'll probably look back at it. But as you said, it's a journey, and you have to just go on for that. I've got a really good question here. So did you record anything? Were any of the sessions recorded? Did you put them in a repository where people could get their hands on them?
Yes. So, well, actual recording of the session was, again, up to the participants and the host. It was whether they wanted it. But we did set up a Slack channel where people could just post artifacts. And as a facilitator, I was like, gathering them. So we've got lots of photos. We've got there's a few, I can send the YouTube links because they're public YouTube links of the virtual raves. And yeah, there's lots of artifacts that came out of it that kind of now live in like the organization's narrative, I guess.
So I've got another question there that I've been holding back, and it's, did leadership get involved?
Yes, a lot of them did. If I recall, one or two of the sessions that got pitched, because the one, like, someone was quite busy. He was a very senior lead, and he was like, I'm going to be making muffins in the morning. You can join me and I'll put you on video while I make muffins and we can just chat. And so a few people joined him to chat while muffins, and another one just was like, I'm going to grab a cup of coffee. So I'd say the leadership representation was kind of proportionate to the overall representation.
Do you think that made a difference? Because often when you do these kind of things, if the leadership aren't backing it, people are a bit hesitant to get involved because they're not sure how the leadership's going to take it if they spend that time.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely think that made a difference. And there was even one or two times where I think leads advocated for it in various channels leading up to it. So like join this thing or I've added this session. I just thought of another session. One of the leads, I co-created it with them, but it was our head of people, so our highest level of leadership. And her and I created a company-wide trivia. And so that was also like a really fun session because we used Kahoot and people were playing on their phones. And that was, one of the busiest people in the organization who took the time to build a little trivia game with me.
Oh, that's good. Please tell me you didn't allow karaoke, right?
I actually think there was a karaoke. There was one which was instruments, so people like talking about instruments, and there was one that was something to do with singing, and I was like, oh hell no, I'm not going to that, but I'm glad that that's a space for people who want to.
All right. And Andrew made a nice comment there. Collective ownership's powerful. That's good advice. Let's talk a little bit more about collective ownership then, in terms of that. How do you ensure people really do want to do that collective ownership? Because often it's you ask volunteers and there's a line of people and 5 people step back and 2 are left standing at the front. Or there's a voluntold situation. That's it. Oh, you've been voluntold. Collective ownership's not like that. So how did you get that to happen around this particular event?
Well, I mean, what I'll say comes with the context that it's embedded in Automatic's culture as well. So you can't really take credit for something where the foundation is there and it's not easy to copy paste. But I do think that we can't like make collective ownership happen, but we can create the conditions in which it naturally arises. So I believe that human beings want to enjoy themselves and people are naturally intrinsically motivated, right? But then unfortunately we often find ourselves in environments where those natural desires or outflowings are inhibited for various reasons, and it's often inhibited by things that weren't intended to inhibit, right? So company policies that come in to manage this exception and then have these knock-on effects, or this structure that then dampens all this beautiful intrinsic motivation that we have. So for me, it's not a case of making ownership happen. It's more about creating the conditions where this very natural, beautiful thing that's so human just kind of flows out. And for me, then it's about the language, right? So making sure that the language is authentic and does speak to something that people want to do, right? Like it would be difficult to be like, I don't know, this is a really cool event about security. I mean, that's my bias, right? Maybe some people would actually find that super cool, so I'm really sorry. But I was just thinking that it has to be something genuine and powerful, not something easy. And then also make sure that there genuinely are no practices or structures in the organization that are going to inhibit it. Like you asked, are there leads who are going to disincentivize this? So we worked with leads to make sure that there wouldn't be disincentives happening, like punitive measures or whatever. Is it okay for people to come? Are there any processes they have to go through? And there aren't really. Like at Automatic, we have infinite leave. You can take as much leave as you want anyway. So how you use your time is how you use your time. You're trusted. So I think all of those conditions were already there, and we created some just so that it could more naturally arise.
So that there's a question just coming straight away. Infinite leave. You just said infinite leave. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we have I guess nothing's infinite because you only have 365 days in the year, but there is no limit to how much leave you can take at Automatic. And it comes from that principle of people are trusted and you're responsible for your own outcomes. So it's on you to have the right conversations with your team to make sure that you're performing, that the group is performing, that your lead is. And rather than putting like a mandated policy, it's the decision making is distributed down to everyone. And you can take as much leave as you want.
That's a really interesting mandate, because that I can see now, right? All of the managers listening to this are literally going, how do I control that?
Yeah, but then it also comes back to, like, you can't just copy paste like artifacts of the culture. You have to look at the principles that were there that enabled the culture to flow. So um automatic hire is very intentionally, like, responsibility is something people learn like through every interaction. So I completely imagine that copy pasting that practice in another place would be disastrous. Like, it's not a golden practice. It's, I think, the underlying principles of trust and distribution and ownership that are powerful.
So the other one I wanted to ask, so automatic's been around a long time, like you said, about 2014 or something to that effect.
2005.
2005. There you go. Yeah, that'd be right. I think I built a website not long after that, which I still own on WordPress. But when you think about it, 2005 to now, how have they sustained that culture? How has that culture that
Mm,
they built evolved and sustained? Because you see
mm,
organizations where they do have these wonderful cultures, and then it only takes one set of stumbling blocks, like a new CEO, and then they
mm,
change the round table and turn it into a square table, throw a few chairs away and put a few new chairs in and go, look what I've done, and then the whole culture of the organization falls apart. That's a
mm,
long time to sustain that particular culture.
yeah. I don't think there's a perfect answer to that, but I can share some, like, maybe perspectives. So Matt Mullenweg, the founder, who has these very strong beliefs around distributed working and trust and lifestyle as well, he's still involved. He's still our CEO, and he still advocates for these things, as well as the power of open source, both internally and externally. You'll hear his voice in lots of spaces. So I think that's very important, is having like these value driven leaders who continue to hold that vision. Um, and then there's a few other things they do that I've experienced to be quite powerful. So when everyone joins, they spend 2 weeks doing customer support. And it was the most stressful, terrifying 2 weeks of my life. I had to do technical customer support, and you start on like email tickets, and then you go into like live chat. And there were tears one day, but it's so good because everyone gets firsthand experience of who our customers are, and you supporting, like, I saw their websites and I saw where they were. There was someone in Nigeria, and like, it was so cool. So that gives you this kind of firsthand connection to what we do. And you also have to make your way through it, right? So that process has to be self-directed. It's asynchronous. You're not on calls with people guiding you through it. So exactly the skills you're going to need to get through the rest of the company, you learn in those first 2 weeks. So that, and you do it then every year after that for 1 week. You spend a week in customer support. So I think that's the other thing. Um, and then I think our hiring is very intentional. So you have to contract with Automatic to do a little mini project before you start, and you get paid for it. But that also, they're checking how you communicate, how you use their tools. You're also checking, do I like this? So it's a very intentional selection of people who are going to be communicators and like high responsibility. So those are some of the things, definitely not all of the things.
You know what I got from that is the next time I've got a problem, I can dial a friend.
Dial a friend.
Yeah, you.
Am I the friend? Okay, you can dial a friend. I don't know how that'll work for you though. If you've only got one phone call, please don't use it on me.
Hey, look, that's brilliant. Look, we're pretty close to the end of our time now. There is a one more comment here. A week every year in customer support. That's awesome. So I think somebody was really impressed by that. I
Mm,
think you can't believe that would bring that to everybody. Would be thinking about how they play with their end customer and everything they do. So I think that's fantastic. We've learned
yeah.
lots of good things about this today, and we're very close to the end. Kirsten, how can people get in touch with you? How can they touch base and discuss some of this? And of course, not forgetting the fantastic book. And of course, she did tell me off air that she's writing another one.
Well, to be seen. So that's probably going to evolve more into another blog that I'm writing. But yeah, I have a website where I share random ideas as they come up. So that's just kirstenclacey.com, and you can subscribe there. And then there is some new thing coming out soon. But that's probably the easiest way, is or LinkedIn. I've pretty much dialed back from most other social media. Or else you can email me. I'm slow to respond to emails, but my email is hello@kirstenclacey. So you can find
Fantastic.
me there too.
Kirsten, it's been look, we could go for a long, long time, but it's been fantastic to have you on and talking remote today. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you so much for all the people that have asked questions. I hope you found that useful and enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.